G'day, my name is Nick Bowditch. Welcome to this webinar on how to handle change by rebooting your thinking. I am a motivational speaker. I'm a best-selling author. My best-selling book is called Reboot Your Thinking. And I also work as a counsellor. I have a diploma in counselling, and I work in a therapeutic situation with clients one-on-one, as well as small group stuff. And the majority of what we deal with in that is how to handle change, how to deal with and accept and move past traumas, and also some addiction issues and different identity issues as well. Today, what I want to talk about is how to reboot your thinking to handle disruption, to handle change in your life. The best way to accept what's going on, if acceptance is the best way, and we'll talk about that. And also then, how to get past it, some tools and tips and little tricks, I guess, in which you can use to get past disruptions like, we're going through at the moment. There's a global pandemic at the moment. It's changed a lot of how we work. It's certainly changed how I work. The majority of the time I work on stages at events, offline events with rooms full of people. And so that's obviously dried up at the moment and changed, and a lot of it's now online like this. So we've had to get used to this stuff, and as consumers as well as presenters. And that's part of the change that I want to talk about today. Is how do we handle it when everything changes in an instant, when everything changes seemingly overnight? You lose your income, your family loses its income, you lose your career in some cases, and worse, of course, is to lose your health or to lose somebody from your life completely as a result of their diminished health. So we're going to talk about all that today and more in this upcoming webinar, how to handle change by rebooting your thinking. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about is change in general, and why we don't deal with that very well. We tend not to like things to change too dramatically, and certainly not too quickly. Some of us don't handle any change at all ever. That's a different thing. And then some people seem quite adept to it, and that can put more pressure on those who aren't handling the change so well too, because they can see by making comparisons of their own personality to someone else's, how come Joe Bloggs is dealing with this so well and I'm not, right? And one of the biggest reasons change is hard is because of fear, because we're fearful of it. We fear missing out on something. We fear being included in something. We fear losing something or someone. It's a very real fear at the moment, and rightly so, and we fear the general sense of change itself, because it's not what we're used to. It's not what we've slid into and made part of our everyday existence. And therefore it's hard, it's hard to come up against that stuff and just be okay with it. Most people are not. So, one of the first things I want to really address and speak about is the fear that comes up when things change. And fear is something that binds us all, and it's also something that defines us all in some ways, how we deal with fear, whether we accept fear, whether we push through it, or whether we back away from it. And both of those things are fine depending on who you are in the situation. I'm not one of these people who says you've just got to push through fear, you've got to get to the other side, because fear can also be a really good regulating thing for us to use as a safety measure. It's don't touch that. I'm scared of touching that because it's sharp or it's hot or it's electrified or it's whatever. And that's actually a really handy thing in having our life. So don't discount fear as a terrible thing we mustn't have, because I think it's something we do have. And it's something that we should actually want to have to some degree in our life, because it's a safety issue and it's a safety lever for us to pull. But on the other hand, and by the same token, I'd also think about what are we fearful of? It's not the fear that's necessarily the issue. It's what are we backing away from, or what are we scared to go after, or what's on the other side of fear that we either just don't want or we don't think we deserve. That's a big one too, right? So in worrying about change and being fearful of change, I would encourage us not to be less sort of focused on actually the fear itself and feeling those things and denying those fears and those feelings, and actually concentrating on concentrating more on what is it we're fearful of. Is that a bad thing? Is it a good thing? Is it a neither thing? Is it a neutral kind of thing? Is it fear of what somebody else is going to think about us? Because, I really don't care about that. Or is it fear because that could hurt us? That could hurt somebody in my life. That could hurt someone I love. That could hurt my chances of being happy. Whatever that line ends up being, that's actually a reasonable thing to be fearful of. So in addressing the change, the first thing I think we need to do is either accept or deny our fear of it. What are we looking at here that's going, why are we worried? What's it going to do? What's the worst thing that can happen here? What are we actually fearful of? And once we address that and really concentrate on what it is we are fearful of, then we can move through that potentially and be able to say, okay, I'm scared of this. I'm recognizing that I'm scared of this. I can accept that fear and move on, and one of the biggest things we're fearful of, particularly at the moment in the world, is just the unknown. There's something happening in our life on a global scale that we don't understand, that we as humans don't understand. It's not like some of us understand and some don't. Like it's really a lot of unknown, and that is really scary. So it's quite okay to feel fear. I don't think we should deny that. I don't think you should live in denial of it or try to stop being fearful of it. I would much, much rather that we sat in that and we accepted it and we said to ourselves, what is it we're actually fearful of here? Is it real? Because once you can do that, then you can start to move through it. Okay, the next thing that can happen in our life, not just now but always, is how we handle loss and grief and mourning. And these things, obviously, everybody deals with in a different way. The majority of us don't deal with it very well, and the majority of us don't allow ourselves to be near somebody or in the vicinity of someone or in somebody's network who's not dealing with it very well. We don't like that, so we tend to back away from it and protect ourselves, right? And I think a lot of the grief thing that people go through, we tend to attach to things or people rather than the connection we have with those people. I'll give you an example. If somebody in your life who you have a really strong, healthy, intimate connection with dies, right? They're gone from your life. We tend to concentrate our grief on that person, on the actual physical being that they are. And what we are actually grieving and mourning and missing is that person's energy, the connection we have with that person, the memories we made with that person, the feelings I have when I think about that person. That's the stuff that we're missing. We're not missing the body. We're not missing the physical person at all. We're missing who they were and what they meant to us and how they made us feel and all those really, really great things that human connection brings. So and this is whether it's through a loss of a job or loss of a person or loss of income or loss of direction, loss of whatever, loss of hope. It's always the same thing. We're always missing that connection that we have with someone. And that human connection, that's what we're wired for. We are hardwired for connection. We are pack animals. We are supposed to operate in herds. And that's not easy for some people. It's not easy for me. I don't love that. I don't love intimate connection with a whole lot of people. I'm a very introverted person, and people might say, oh, how do you get up on the stage and speak to, thousands of people? And to be honest, I don't know how I do that. It's just how I slot into that role and I play the role while I'm on the stage and then I'm done. Because if you met me then afterwards, one-on-one, sometimes I can be super awkward, in a social situation or one-on-one, whereas I can speak on stage in front of lots of people. So that connection for me to a lot of people at an intimate level is not what I want, right? I just don't enjoy it. But I know that it's actually really helpful for me. It's actually really healthy for me. So I'm someone who lives with mental illness myself, and I have lived with addiction before in my life. And addiction and connection are kind of two opposite ends of a spectrum, which can't exist with each other, right? You're either addicted or you're connected. So for me, I know that connection is the answer for me. I know how important it is for me. I just don't love it. I'm not going to lie, I don't love it. So, When I lose that connection though with somebody who I have agreed, have made a little pact with spiritually and emotionally that we will connect, then there is a real sense of loss and a real sense of grief then. Because, I have allowed that person to hold that bond with me, and that bond is now broken. For a lot of people right now, that's what we're going through. We're going through that loss of connection to somebody else, to our health, to our freedom, to our liberty to go wherever we want, whenever we want, to be around whoever we want in whatever capacity we want to be around them. All of those things have changed. And so, there's grief involved there, real gut-wrenching, actual mourning grief. And so the worst thing we can do in this situation, I reckon, is just to deny that, is to say, I'm okay, like it's okay. I'm not missing that person. I'm not missing my job. Everything will be all right. Well, everything will be all right, but everything will be different, and so to accept, you can't accept one without the other. And I would just really, really support you to think about what you've lost as opposed to who, and what you've, if it's who, then what you've lost with that person, what connection you had with that person, what connection you had with that job. I talked to someone yesterday who told me that they'd lost their job through the global pandemic, and they said that in doing that, they'd lost themselves because all they were was their job. Which is kind of sad, but very real for that person. That person was very sure that that's what was going on for her. So I would just really support you to think about how you're handling loss and grief at the moment, or at any time, and whether you can accept it for what it is, as opposed to just denying it, will help you move through that much, much faster. And then one of the biggest things we go through when there's any sort of change or big disruption to our life is doubt, self-doubt, that comes from how we speak about ourselves, how we think about ourselves, how we think other people should deserve us or not in their life. All of that stuff is changed the minute that there is a big change in our life. We can be somebody who is really confident, who's really self-assured, who's really positive all the time and knows who they are and where they are going and all that stuff. But as soon as there is a little bit of pressure applied through big change or disruption, then it changes in an instant how we speak about ourselves, how we talk to ourselves, how we love ourselves. And those things are very, very, very important because, first of all, we teach other people how to treat us. We teach other people how to treat us. If we allow, and the old saying, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And I think that's very true of how people treat us as well. If you will let somebody treat you poorly, if you're basically teaching them how to do that. And the reason that so many of us let somebody else treat us poorly is because we don't think we're enough, and we say that to ourselves all the time. Our self-talk is constantly, you're nothing, you're crap, you're this, you're an imposter, you're a fraud, you're not nearly as clever as you think you are, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff, that self-talk that goes on, which is really negative, actually becomes really concreted in our head, and it's very difficult to change. Now that's our own self-talk, far less somebody else's. For a lot of us, somebody else's outer voice has become our inner voice. We've heard from when we were little children maybe that we were worth nothing, that we were never going to be anything, we were never going to achieve anything, we didn't deserve anything, whatever that rubbish was that we heard in our heads as we were kids and as we were growing up, and maybe even as adults. And we've internalized that as the truth. We've taken somebody else's outer voice, made our inner voice, and made it the truth. And so we repeat that truth to ourselves all the time. And that's what can make things really difficult when things change around us. That's the first thing that we need to reboot, is our self-talk. Because it's impossible to be in love with yourself. It's impossible to think that you deserve more, or think that you are worthwhile, or any of those things, if the record that's playing in your head is you are not enough. You are not enough. And that's so when there's something that's changed and disrupted, it can just reinforce that lie that we tell ourselves. If you're already hearing in your voice constantly in your own voice, hearing in your head in your own voice, that you are not enough. And then suddenly you lose your job, or you lose your marriage, or you lose whatever, something dear to you. Instead of digging into our resilience at that point, what we can do is just to say, oh, well, that's what I deserve. I knew this would happen, because I'm not worthy of that. I'm unworthy. I'm unlovable. I'm invisible. I don't matter. Whatever the core belief is that we repeat over and over and over to ourselves, most of the time, which isn't true, then the more it gets concrete in our head as the truth. It's very, very difficult to get away from. It's almost impossible to reboot that in some people. But the good news is that for most people, it's not. It's just another disruption in your life that you have to put into order at the moment. At the moment, there might be a lot of disorder in your life. There might be a lot of chaos, a lot of disruption, a lot of change. But some of that change is controllable by you. Some of it is under your control. Some of it isn't. Some of it isn't. A lot of things that happen to us in our everyday for our entire life is going to be out of our direct control, but it's how we react to that control and the choices we make around it, which can actually determine how well we rebound from that, or how well we're able to reboot our thinking out of that and access our resilience and be better. Think different and be better. So I just really want you to think about that. How you speak about yourself, how you talk about yourself to yourself is much, much more important than how you talk about yourself even to anybody else, right? It all starts with that positive self-talk. And I don't just mean looking at yourself in the mirror and going, you're the greatest, you're a winner. That's all good, by the way. I've got no problem with that, but you'll need more than that. You need also to say, this is to say to yourself, you're doing your best. You're trying hard. You are resilient. These things aren't necessarily all under your control. One of my great quotes that I live by is one by Carl Jung, who's a psychotherapist, father of psychotherapy in a lot of ways. Carl Jung said, "I'm not what happened to me, I'm what I choose to become." And I think that is so profound, especially in my life. I went through some trauma as a kid, and it would be very easy to blame my adult stuff-ups on that childhood trauma. And, in some ways, it is directly responsible for that. But I also have the choice every day to say, I'm not what happened to me, I'm what I choose to become. I get to make that choice every single day, and so do you. I get to choose how I speak about myself, to myself, every single day, and so do you. And part of the contributing stuff that makes it difficult to correct that self-talk or to maintain a positive attitude over that stuff is guilt and shame, right? They're not the same thing. Really important to stress that, right? They're both useful in some ways in our life. One can be very, very debilitating, that's shame. One can be kind of limiting, but also kind of educating, and that's guilt, right? So I just want to touch on these things because sometimes I think when people go through loss and change, big change in their life, it brings up these feelings of guilt and shame. It might be something like, if you had only done this differently, then this wouldn't be a big problem now. If you had been a better person for the whole start of your life, then you'd be able to better to deal with this now. Or, things like that, right? The other thing that comes up out of this, and at the moment we're going through this global pandemic, right? And there's a lot of people who would be feeling some survivor guilt here. They've lost somebody in their life who's gotten sick through the virus or whatever, and they've lost that person. That's really sad, really, really devastatingly sad for them. But they also feel like they're alive and they're healthy, and why me and not her? That sort of stuff is actually quite real. And that can be around the loss of life, which is obviously devastating and huge. But it can also be, that I'm in an essential employee situation. I've still got my job. I'm able to do this. That other person's lost their career, their job, or their shop, or their business, or whatever. And there can be a lot of guilt and unnecessarily felt shame around that stuff as well. And so I just want to quickly touch on this, which I've done in the book, the Reboot Your Thinking book, quite extensively. If you want to look more into that, you can. But there's two differences. There's a major difference between the two things, guilt and shame. And guilt says, I did a bad thing. But shame says, I am bad. And that's a very distinct difference between the two, because guilt, I did a bad thing. Okay, I can correct that. I can make amends for that. I can sort that out. I can apologize for it. I can renew myself and affirm to myself that I'm never going to do that again. All those things, all those good things that come out of guilt, right? Whereas if it is I am bad, that's really much more difficult to recover from. It's much more difficult to reboot your thinking out of I am bad as opposed to I did a bad thing. So when there's underlying big changes in our life, one of the things that we have to do is if we do have that feeling, that remorseful gut feeling of shame or guilt, is to just identify which one it is. Is it guilt? Because guilt is recoverable. You can easily come back from that by making amends, by making lists, by making an order in your mind of how you're going to deal with that. But if it's shame you're feeling, then there's different ways to deal with that. There's a whole webinar on its own. But the first thing I would say is if you've identified that feeling as shame, then I'd also ask myself, is it my shame? Is it my shame to carry? Because that can also cut through that and make it a lot easier to rebound from that too. So just recognizing that guilt and shame are not the same thing, and how we might identify both and then how we recover from both actually makes change and disruption as a general thing, a bigger thing, much easier to deal with and recover from. Now, if we were living in isolation, complete isolation from each other always, then these things wouldn't be anywhere near as big a problem as they are for us in a societal way, right? But the fact is we do live in communities, we do live in herds, so we have to think about how other people are dealing with these things. We have to coexist and cohabit with other people, and we have to be empathetic to how somebody else is going through it and how that affects how you're going through it, etc., right? And one of the big downsides of that is comparison, is how we just can't seem to not compare ourselves to somebody else going through the same thing. We don't seem to be able to make that distinction very well. And so I would this part seems really easy, right? Just stop comparing yourself to others. Well, if it was that easy, then none of us would have jobs in this industry, right? But I think it's on the face of it, it is an easy thing to say, stop comparing yourself. Once you dig down, it's a little bit harder because that is how we've been conditioned. That's our modeling. That's our pattern that's always been in our life. So it's very difficult to change that pattern just overnight. Just stop doing it, right? But there's ways that we can actually kind of strategically and quite purposefully think about how we might stop comparing ourselves to others. And the very first thing is to start to believe more in your own spirit, in your own value, your own worth, what you're bringing. And accepting that not one person doesn't bring everything. One person doesn't have every skill set. One person doesn't have every talent, everything a community needs. He's not born in one person. Because we are herd animals, it takes a herd or a village to really bring out the best in everybody, because everybody brings something different to the table. So if you can accept that, okay, that person is good at these 3 things, but they're not so good at these 2 things, which I'm actually pretty good at, then that can be a very healthy comparison, right? But in the end, if we can remove that comparison completely and just say, there is no comparison, there's just me. There's just what I'm bringing. I'm good at this, and this. And if you need anything other than that, then I'm not your man, right? Or I'll have a crack or whatever, but it's not something that's in my skill set, that's on my CV, but whatever. And when we go through a big disruption in life, a big change in life, it's very tempting to dick around with your CV and say, I can do this, I can do this, and I can do that, and I'm really good at that, because we think we need to do that. Whereas, to play to our strengths, to concentrate on the things that are actually what we're really, really good at, is probably what somebody needs anyway. And truthfulness and authenticity and honesty is always the best way forward, always. So, for me, I'm always going to say, I'm always now able to say, these are things I actually am good at. But I try less to compare myself to someone else, or to be somebody else, or to bring what somebody else might be bringing because they're bringing it. And I know I can rely on somebody else to do that. So sometimes when there's a big change, we want to be everything for everybody, but it's just not realistic. It's not feasible, and it's actually kind of really damaging to a lot of us, to our esteem, to our self-talk and our self-love, because that person's so good at that, and they're so rich, and their house is so beautiful, and they're so good looking, and they're so tall, and they're so athletic, and whatever. And what all you're doing in that instance isn't gratifying somebody else, it's just punishing yourself, and that is obviously extremely unhealthy. And then the final kind of difficult emotional and spiritual reality of big change and big disruption is that it picks the scab off the top of our imposter syndrome, right? That feeling that you are a fraud, that feeling that you are not what somebody thinks you are, that you'll never be enough for that person, that you're kind of just, lying your way through life to get by, and eventually someone's going to find out. And that's something that I absolutely live with. It's something that a lot of people who have a high profile, or people who speak on stage as I do often, or whatever, I know a lot of those people have reported to me exactly the same feeling, that, I be 45 seconds before I get on stage, every single time I speak at an event or conference, 45 seconds before I step onto the stage, that little record starts playing and it says, today's the day. Today's the day they work it out. They discover, that you're not as good as you think you are, that you're a fraud, that you're this, you're that. All that stuff plays in my head, and I've managed to not hide it. I've managed to deal with that and speak back to it very, very well. And I'm able to do that job because I'm able to handle that imposter syndrome feeling. I accept it. I accept that feeling. I don't try and deny it or beat it or not feel it. I just accept, there's that feeling again. I know that feeling. I can recognize it because I'm used to it, and so it's not going to kill me. I can get through it. But for a lot of people, that doesn't help, because they can't recognize, first of all, they can't recognize that that's what they're feeling, and then B, they just can't seem to quieten that voice that says you're not enough. And change and disruption and how you handle change, the very basis of this entire webinar, really is very, very reflective of how you speak about yourself, how you feel about yourself, how you think other people think about you. All of those things which can get tied up and inflamed by this imposter syndrome, right? So I just want to share with you a couple of things that I do to sort of combat that, to live with that imposter syndrome, as opposed to just denying it and suffering from it, right? First thing is, I think I try to stop comparing myself to others as much as I can. As I mentioned before, it's not easy, and I still do it, and I catch myself doing it all the time. But when I'm able to compare myself less to others, I'm actually much better version of myself. It's the first thing. The second thing is I keep a nice file. So this might sound a bit narcissistic, I guess, but when somebody says something nice about my books, or a speaking gig that I've done, or a bit of therapy work that I've done with them, or I don't know, whatever, and they say that on Twitter or Instagram or something online, it might be an Amazon review on my book or whatever, then I just screenshot that and I put all those into a file on my Google Drive, which is entitled My Nice File. And when I'm feeling that imposter syndrome, when I can feel it to such a degree, even though I can accept it, when I feel it to such a degree that it starts to tick off my depression or my anxiety or my complex PTSD, when it's starting to affect my own mental health and my mental safety, then I go and I look in this file and I just flick through a few of them and read them. And these are unsolicited, nice things that somebody said about me. I haven't asked them to, they didn't have to. And so that stuff tends to be very authentic and very kind of real. And so then I can concentrate on, okay, well, this is real. The stuff in my head, the imposter stuff in my head, that's not real. That's something I think somebody might think. It's not even half real. So, and yet the stuff in the nice file is definitely real. It's real as someone typed it there today, and I screenshot it and I've kept it. So I know that those things are real, and sometimes just that comparison of what is real versus what is not. Sometimes we can get very caught up in what might be instead of, you know, what is. And that what if versus what is a very well defining factor as to how we feel about ourselves, how we build communities, how we rebuild communities, how we handle change and disruption. And so one of the things that I think in doing in keeping that nice file is just saying to yourself, it's okay. It's okay. What you're thinking is not real. What you're reading, seeing is real. How about we focus on that? And that works, 9 times out of 10. And then the third thing I think about the imposter syndrome is just have a crack. Nobody knows what they're doing anyway. I think sometimes we get very caught up in, what will they think about that? Somebody's going to say it's silly. Somebody's going to say I'm up myself. Somebody's going to, whatever. But then in the end, if you're just restricted to the point where you're not going to do any of those things, then nobody's going to hear from you anyway. And you won't have made a mistake because you won't have done anything. You won't have made a mistake because you won't have made anything, right? So I'm a big believer in just have a crack. Nobody knows what they're doing anyway. And see where the cards fall, No, there's no such thing as successful haters. The only people who are trolling other people sitting in a dark room typing Facebook comments at 2 o'clock in the morning about how crap someone is and how good they are, they're not feeling good about themselves. They're also not doing anything. They're not doing anything. It's easy to do nothing. If you want to stay away from criticism, if you never want to be criticized, never want to have anyone, critique your work, never have anyone, decide or vote on or consider what you've made, then don't make or do anything. It's really simple. Just don't do anything. And that's not what I want. It's not what I want for you either. So I'm a big believer in this. Just have a crack. Because in doing that, you quieten so many of your own demons. And if you can take away your need to be critiqued by other people and to know what that critique is, then that quietens even more demons for you going forward. So that's all the stuff that can sort of bring us down in this change and disruption. These are the things that we need to reboot from potentially. In the next section, now I'm going to talk about all the upside stuff, all the stuff that's really positive and that we can do, the tips and tricks that we can do every day in our life to reboot our thinking, to handle change more effectively. Okay, so that's kind of the negative stuff, or, the stuff that we feel and we might be better off not feeling. Going forward through change and through disruption to reboot our thinking, these are the things that can actually hold us back. So now I want to concentrate on the things that can propel us forward, the things that can fix, not fix us, but work towards letting us be the best version of ourselves. And that's all I'm after, right? I don't chase perfection. I don't encourage anyone else to chase perfection. I think, it's just futile, obviously, but it also can mean it just picks a whole lot of scabs off things that we needn't be troubled by. So for me, my main purpose in life each day is to be just a little bit better than I was the day before. And so on and so on and so on into the future, so that I can just keep moving forward. Now, some days, some weeks, I take steps back, multiple steps back sometimes, but then, I can reassess and start again and reset every day and hope and practically work towards being the best version of myself, a little bit better than I was yesterday, each day. And as long as I can keep that focus and stop looking towards perfectionism, stop looking towards being perfect or fixed, then I know that I'm moving in the right direction, or at least moving in a direction, which for a lot of people would be a bonus, right? Would be the way forward for a lot of people. So the first thing, obviously that propels us forward is to change our self-talk and all those sorts of things. And I think, that's all well and good. It's all, something which I think that we should all be working on and working towards. But what are some practical things we can do, right? So there's 4 things that I'm going to talk about today, which I use all the time in my own head and in my own work that I do on myself, in trying to be the best version of me and trying to develop myself better. The first one is to use creativity. Now, I love creativity for lots of reasons. There's no there's no creativity without vulnerability, for a start. And vulnerability helps me. Vulnerability cuts through a lot of the stuff where I think, that I'm invincible. That I think also the converse of that is true, where I think I'm absolutely not invincible and everybody is better than me and all of that stuff. And that vulnerability allows me to cut through that, or at least sit in it. And so to access that vulnerability, the easiest way for me is to be creative, is to tap into my own creativity, to tap into that stuff that the writer Liz Gilbert talks about, the big magic, the stuff that you chase and the stuff that you can appreciate when you base your life more on creativity than you do on fear. And so that creativity, I think, is a really great outlet for all of us. Now, I know some people are saying right now when they hear that, well, I can't draw, I can't sing, I can't play a musical instrument, I can't write a book, I can't. And I understand that, right? I understand that feeling, and I understand why people say that. But I think it's also worth thinking about. Maybe it's better to focus on what we can do. Maybe it's better to focus less on all the I can'ts and more on the I can'ts. Like, what can I do? For a lot of us right now, you might not be able to connect with your mum and dad, in person. You might not be able to go to the job that you've always gone to. You might not be able to do whatever. Your career projection might have been completely changed in the last few months, few weeks. And it's very easy to get caught up in that stuff as opposed to focusing on, okay, those are the things I can't do. How about the things I can do, right? And one of those things that comes up when we think about what we can't do is, I can't write a book. I can't sing a song. I can't, write an opera. I can't paint a beautiful painting or whatever. But creativity doesn't have to be some world-class art piece or some beautiful tenor singing voice. I access creativity every day without doing any of those things. I make my bed really, really well, and maybe too well. But I focus on that. I want to make good effort of it because I think that's the first piece of creativity I can get done every single day. It's the first job I can achieve something in every single day. And so by making my bed and making it schmick, not perfect, but it looked really nice and really inviting to get back into tonight, then that's the first time I've been creative and been successfully creative in a day. For some people, it'll be, cooking the perfect piece of toast, making the perfect scrambled eggs, having the perfect sandwich, parking their car the perfect way. Like, all of these things are expressions of creativity. That it doesn't have to be painting a Picasso or writing a Beethoven concerto. It just has to be an expression of yourself which you are proud of, that you want to express yourself in a way that others people might see or not see, but in a way that accesses that deep held stuff that lets you be yourself, lets you express yourself. And that's often the very first most powerful step in expressing yourself, in rebooting your thinking, in handling change and disruption, is by focusing on something you can create which you get some sort of buzz out of, some sort of spiritual enhancement from, right? And that can be something as simple as making your bed, or it can be painting something in beautiful oil color, watercolors or whatever. Like, it's all the same. It's all the same. But when you don't access that creativity, you don't actually access the part of your brain that says you're able to do something, that says you're able to express yourself, that says you are different to somebody else, but you still have a lot to offer. Those things are underlined with creativity, and creativity is the best free thing that we each have going for us. And I think we do really well to tap into more each and every day. Okay, the next way forward, and I've touched briefly on it before, is to focus on fact. To focus on, is this real, right? Because, and a lot of my clients who I work with one-on-one in a therapy setting, if they're watching this, they'll be rolling their eyes because they know I bang on about this all the time. They tell me they're sure that somebody is feeling this about them, or somebody's saying about this about them, or that somebody's going to be affected by this or whatever. And I say, well, where's the data? Where's the proof of that? Is that real? Because quite often it's just not real. And, we can't seem to get away from that. The power of what might be is a lot stronger than the power of what is for a lot of us, for a lot of the time. So focusing on what is real and what is not real is obviously extremely helpful when you're combating a whole lot of things that potentially aren't real in anyway. And change makes things not real. Disruption makes things not real that was real. And so, I think we need to have a really fresh look at this all the time. Is this real? Not, was it real a week ago or a month ago or a year ago? Is it real now? Can I have some data? Can I show some data that this is actually happening? Or is this just what I'm thinking? Right? Is it just something I think might happen? Is it just something that I think somebody might be saying or might say about me or whatever? Those things tend not to be real. And even if they come true down the track, that point is where they become real, and then we can deal with it. Otherwise, you're just chasing shadows all the time, right? So the first sort of question I ask in this section is, and I ask myself these three questions a lot when I have a feeling of, I think something is happening here. I think somebody's having a reaction to me here, or somebody's ignoring me, or somebody's, I don't know, whatever it might be crazy that's going on in my head at the time. I ask myself three questions. The first question is it real? And if I can say yes, it is real, then I go on to the second question. But if any time through these three questions, the answer is no, then I have to give myself permission to let that feeling go. I might pick it up down the track, depending on my level of madness this week, I probably will. But in that moment, I give myself permission to let that feeling go. Is it real? Yes or no, right? Second question then is, can I change it? So, if I ask myself a question, if I have a feeling, right, a thought, and I'm worried about something, and I say to myself, okay, is that real? And I can say, well, yes, it is real. I saw it. It was written down. I heard it. Not somebody who might have said it who might have related it back to me third hand, but it is real. Then I go on to the second question, can I change it? Now, this is obviously often where it also stops, because sometimes you just can't change it. You can make amends for things and whatever, and that means you can change it, right? That's yes. But and that's when we move on to the third one, but the second question of can I change it is a really great way of just stopping that feeling from spiraling down the gurgler into God knows what. Because if something is real, yes, it's real. Can I change it? No. The moment's gone, that person's not in my life anymore, I'm not at that job anymore, or by sharing this with this person, it's going to be worse for them than it is for me. Like, if there's no point, if by sharing or trying to make amends with someone actually hurts that person more, then I don't really think that's a great idea, right? So can I change it? If the answer is no, then I have to, again, give myself permission to let that feeling go. All right? And then the third question, if it's yes, it's real, yes, I can change it. The third question is the most important question in some ways I ask myself then is, does it matter anyway? Right? Because if it's real and I can change it, does it matter though? Like, does it really matter? Is it going to be something I think about in 5 days, in 5 years? Is it something that's going to change someone's life for the better? Or is it just going to dig up stuff that doesn't need to be rehashed? Is it going to be something which I'm going to pine about, grieve for? Is it something I'm going to be challenged about that hurts me, physically or emotionally? Is it going to be something that I can't have anymore or whatever because of the change and disruption going on in my life? These are the questions I have to ask myself. And if the answer is yes, then okay, I can change it and I should, right? Is it real? Yes. Can you change it? Yes. Does it matter anyway? Well, yes, it does. Then okay, I'll deal with that. But I have to tell you, when you ask yourself those three questions in that particular order, you very, very rarely, or I shouldn't say you, I very, very rarely get to the end and go, yeah, it was real. Yeah, I could change it now. And yeah, it doesn't matter. Quite often I might get to the second one. I might even get to the third one. Does it matter anyway? Well, no, it doesn't. So I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to give myself permission to let that feeling go. And that can actually be a really great way of just getting through something that's different, getting through change, handling disruption, handling, the grief and loss of something or someone in my life. Is it real? Can I change it? Does it matter anyway? Okay, and then the last and final piece of advice or final thing that I use myself to propel myself forward, as opposed to being held back by the other stuff, and to change my thinking and reboot my thinking around change and disruption in my life, is to think about this question, which I ask myself every day. And I often finish my presentations on stage and stuff with this question too. What would you do if you weren't afraid? What would I do if I wasn't scared of it? If I didn't have fear of it? If I wasn't sure of the outcome of it? If none of that stuff mattered, what would I do today, every day? What would you do with your life if you weren't afraid? And this right now in the world is a great time for a lot of us to look at what our life is, look at what our career is, look at how we're spending our time, how we're investing for our future, the relationships we're in or are not in yet, and be able to assess whether, if I wasn't afraid, I would do something about that. If I wasn't afraid, I would ask that person out, or I would end this relationship. I'd go for a different job, or I would start a job. I would start a business, or I'd end a business. Now, any of those things are viable options if you take fear out of the equation. But whilst ever we're held back by that fear, we're held back from our future and from our happiness. We're held back from connection with others. We're held back from achieving what we need to achieve as a person, what our design is, whatever that is. We're held back from our purpose. We're held back from connection. And that's sad. It's sad that fear has that control over us. And it's sad that some people just can't seem to get past it. As I said at the start, fear is not a terrible thing. Fear is a safety thing for a lot of us. Sometimes it's just safety from, putting ourselves out there into a situation where we're not comfortable, or we think we might be ridiculed, whatever. But for a lot of people, we can imagine a life beyond that fear. For a lot of people, all the good stuff is on the other side of that fear. If that's you, then I would encourage you to think about this today too. What would you do if you weren't afraid? What are you going to do today that scares the daylights out of you? Because the more often you do those things, the more you challenge your life, the more you streak after your purpose, the more you connect with other people, the better you are, the better all of us are. And so in thinking about how to change and disrupt your life by rebooting your thinking, maybe the only question you have to ask yourself is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? My name is Nick Bowditch. You can find me at nickbowditch.com.au or at Nick Bowditch across all the socials. Thank you so much for watching this today. I appreciate any feedback or anything you would like to give me. Please do so. I love that. Feedback is a gift, and I'm more than happy to take any that is thrown my way. And I really hope you find your way through this change and through this disruption in your life to be the best version of yourself tomorrow and the next day and the day after that.